Thanks, Jenny. That's a lovely introduction. I'll try to live up to it. Thanks to everybody for coming today. I'm really excited about this event because, to be honest, the Irish pipeline is something I kind of only started learning about recently. So I'm interested to know more. We've two guest speakers today, Beaudry Allen and Marcus O'Sullivan. Also, just to make you aware, we're going to record this event just for some of my students who can't be here today. So Marcus is currently on a track in North Carolina and is racing back to his hotel. So he's going to join us hopefully in about 20-25 minutes. So Beaudry is going to hold down the fort until then. So just to introduce you to Beaudry Allen, she joined the distinctive collections as the Preservation and Digital Archivist at Falvey Memorial Library at Villanova. She's originally from California and earned her BA in European History from the University of California at Santa Cruz, MA in European History from Villanova, and an MA in Archival Records Administration from the San Jose State University. So Beaudry has a wealth of knowledge about not only the Irish collections at Falvey Library, but a lot of their preservationist work as well. And to introduce you to Marcus before he gets here, Marcus O'Sullivan is from County Cork in Ireland. He is a two-time NCAA champion as an undergraduate at Villanova. He was part of 6 Penn relay titles and also captured a total of 10 Big East crowns. He went on to become a 4-time Olympian and is one of just 3 people ever to run more than 100 sub 4-minute miles, and he is currently the head coach of the men's track and field and the cross country men's distance at Villanova University. So absolutely delighted to have them. With all of that, I'm going to hand over to Beaudry.
Great. So do you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see that.
Perfect. Let me get this going. Okay.
Beaudry, sorry to interrupt you before you start. If anybody would like to ask a question at any time, you can just pop it into the chat box. And once Marcus and Beaudry have both spoken, we'll go back into the chat and go through a little Q&A for about 10 minutes. Thanks, Beaudry.
No problem. Thank you, everyone, for having me. My name is Beaudry Allen. I'm the Digital and Preservation Archivist for the university. And what that means is I'm responsible for the preservation of our institutional memory, whether it's created digitally or in analog form, better known as physical papers. Today, I'm going to talk about the Irish pipeline in context with Villanova history and the work that I do with the material and the preservation. Before I begin, I want to say is Marcus O'Sullivan is the expert and the historian of the pipeline itself. And he was the one who told me about this incredible relationship between Ireland and Villanova. It's his work and having the athletic department interns research in the archives that has helped me bring about access to unused and underdescribed collections that we have, which also has led me to giving more attention on finding and linking Irish history and especially Irish pipeline history with our archival material. Overall, my talk is about before the serendipitous event in 1948, with Jimmy Reardon accepting the American Track and Field Scholarship to Villanova University. That has led to one of the most successful US track programs, which has had 25 Irish athletes coming through the Irish pipeline. But as an archivist, I would say this is a really important topic because it's in a convergence of 2 landmarks for Villanova, our relationship with Ireland and our track history. So today I'm going to be using archival material to sort of describe that history. First, I'll discuss our longstanding relationship with Ireland with some of the records in the archives in relation to academics. Many may know our university was founded by Irish Augustinians, and our first presidents were Irish Augustinians. Our first president, Reverend John O'Dwyer, Reverend Patrick Moriarty, and Reverend Patrick Stanton, to name a few. And we also have presidents' papers in our archives that deal more with their administrative side as well. What a lot of people don't know is our first international students came from Ireland and did so very early on. As you can see here, we have a sample of a student list from the 1850s, enrolled students from Ireland. The list can be found in the historical sketch of the Augustinian Monastery, College and Mission of the St. Thomas of Villanova book, which we have digitized. These Irish students would either be clergy or laymen who are either here to attend the school or immigrated to the US. We don't really know much about this relationship or how they knew about Villanova as a student if they're a layman, but we can see at the inception of Villanova was closely tied to Ireland academically as well as a religious institution. Before Irish Studies was an official department in 1979, Irish culture and study was very much interwoven in Villanova curriculum and culture. Irish literature was incorporated as well as Villanova would actually have events called the Irish Olympics. This is something that I would kind of describe as today as symposiums and Irish cultural events. For example, Villanova did a huge 1950 Irish exhibition where there were fashion shows, exhibits, lectures, dinner events, and as well as you can see here, there are children activities where children are looking at Irish stamps. And I would totally be remiss to note that Villanova has invited Irish ambassadors to campus all the time. Here is an honorary degree bestowed to John Hearn, Irish ambassador in 1950, also part of the cultural events. And as many as you probably know, Abbott Theater Exchange Program with Villanova University that was established in 2011. The program links the College of Liberal Arts and Science with the Abbey Theater through the study abroad program, lectures, workshops, and other activities. The Abbey Theatre, also known as the National Theatre of Ireland in Dublin, Ireland, was founded in 1904 by W.B. Yeats and Lady Gregory. I note this because our Special Collections has a collection of early Abbey Theatre programs. And now I'll turn my attention to track and field history, till the fateful meeting that led to the Irish Pipeline, and the excitement to show off more of our archival collection. Track and field in the early days was part of the big three sports on campus, and that was baseball, football, and track. And many students would actually play more than one sport. Since the early days of Villanova, track has always had a presence. In the 1850s, foot races and events called hop, step, and jump were played. The first issue of the Villanova Monthly, known today as the Villanovan, the student newspaper, noted annual fall day sports that included track events. In 1895, Penn Relays, the oldest and largest track and field competition, began at the University of Pennsylvania. In the beginning, it was known as the Penn Relay Carnival. Villanova first appeared in the relays in 1897. And here is an image of the Villanova relay team in 1925. And here are some images of field days from 1909 and 1910. Field days were huge spring events on campus, and most upperclassmen would participate. The programs shown are the earliest programs of Field Day. Field Day started in 1907, and a year later, Villanova's first Olympian, James O'Connell, in men's track and field went to the Olympics. It wasn't until 1924 that track became an official formalized sports team at Villanova. And now we all know Jay Wright on campus today. He's the big basketball coach and star of Villanova. Students wear shirts with his name, but on par with the celebrity and accolades was James Jumbo Elliott, pictured in the center here. He was the track and field coach from 1935 to 1981. Under his tutelage, led Villanova University Wildcats to 8 national championships and coached 28 Olympic competitors. It's an incredible feat, but also highlights how our track team has always been a formidable force and a world-renowned track program, only made better by the Irish Pipeline. And this leads to 1948 Olympics with American athletes George Gita and Browning Ross, pictured left, got to chatting with Irish athletes at the 1948 Olympics with sprinter Jimmy Reardon, thrower Common Clancy, and miler John Joe Barry, which led to the beginnings of the pipeline. It was during these conversations that the actual Villanova athletes said, hey, you know, it would be a pretty good idea if you joined Villanova. And I think Jumbo would actually agree, and he certainly did. So here are the 3 original athletes that began the pipeline at Villanova. And this is one of the negatives that we've actually recently digitized in our digital library. And I also want to bring up an example of Villanova's prestige in track and field world is the university also hosted the first Martin Luther King International Freedom Games in 1969, which was a popular track and field competition until the 1980s. So my job is to maintain these narratives by collecting and preserving records that tell our story. For the Irish pipeline in particular, it means to enliven these stories and connecting the pipeline with Villanova history as a whole. One of the stumbling blocks is when we get material, photographs, programs, papers, it's not always described. So we have little records that actually describe the Irish pipeline. To rectify that slowly, and made even slower by the pandemic, is that we are organizing track material. As you can see here, a couple student workers have helped organize thousands of negatives that we have, many of which are track and field, especially as you can see these 5x4 negatives the students are holding. These 5x4 negatives are of track events on campus and off campus. And they're only briefly described or given a generic title and date when given to the archives. So what's lost in the image is the story of the pipeline, with little information about the people, context, and events. By scanning these images, we get to see better what the negatives are and able to review the negatives so we can build the pipeline story in context. It helps us show how important track history is to the Villanova community. And it also helps create a better timeline of Villanova sports in general. Scanning also means we can directly add these images to the digital library so it's more accessible to the public. The biggest work, though, is in description. As I mentioned, once scanned, we can have our images connected with the Irish pipeline and then work on identifying the players. For example, here is a photograph from 1965. The title is brief, but we need to add names and describe more of the event to make the image more accessible and contextual to better the story of track and field. When you research a library catalog, you usually type in keywords. So we need to create keywords like player names, events, and a local subject heading called the Irish pipeline to these images to allow easier searching and better position Irish pipeline as a major historical moment for Villanova. Here I've developed the Irish pipeline as a subject heading that can be implemented in our finding aids and made searchable in our catalog as this project to digitize and organize this collection more. Though I will admit we aren't in the position to do this in mass, but getting a few images from our research requests in the digital library at a time has been really helpful. And it's also been really helpful with having Marcus O'Sullivan's interns is that they've been able to really point out collections that we wouldn't necessarily have, would have thought on the onset they would have connections to Ireland that we actually do. So a lot of our athletic records, whether they're photographs or programs or written documentation about like administrative stuff, there's these little holes of information that to discuss the relationship with Ireland, of bringing new students in, or a list of student athletes that are from Ireland, because you'll know when looking at yearbooks, they don't always describe where the student's from. So it's through these records we're able to identify which students are Irish athletes. So this concludes my portion, but please check out Villanova's digital library to see our digitized material. You can learn more about Villanova history as we have yearbooks, student newspapers, commencement programs, and photographs in our digital library. You can also contact me for more information about the archives and Villanova history. And if you're interested in our special collections, you can contact Laura Bang and Rebecca Aviato for more information.
Thank you, Beaudry. That was absolutely fantastic. I've seen some of your digital archives. Absolutely amazing. The quality of some of these old photos and everything is unbelievable. So thank you for sharing that link as well, if anybody wants to look at it more. So I see that Marcus has joined the call, so we're delighted to have him. So Marcus, I've introduced you to the group already. So if you'd like to take over from that and tell us some more about the Irish pipeline.
Thanks very much, Elaine. You can hear me fine, I imagine?
Yeah, we can hear you and see you, yep.
And great job, Beaudry. I think Beaudry and I have connected over the years because of just me looking for things, and I think through the connection we've helped each other find pathways to different historical facts in terms of around track and field. I think my interest has just come from people asking me for information, like I'm the one that's supposed to have it. And what I found over the years that we haven't done a terrific job in keeping our archives. And so consequently, in my exploration up to the library and meeting Beaudry, I can find that her willingness to just start putting things together, and through the number of years that we've known each other, we've kind of been helping each other out. And amazingly, things are starting to kind of have a sense of pattern and have a sense of understanding. And I think it's such an interesting, and I mean, obviously for me, I'm Irish, but it definitely has the sense of a sense of place in our university, and primarily because of through my explorations, long before track and field got its hold in the 40s by way of Jumbo Elliott. The kind of legacy has to go back to 100 years prior, when Father Moriarty, who had come educated in Carlow College in Carlow, and had made his way to Philadelphia, and through just the way things evolved in the mid 1800s, having to emerge the Augustinians out to this area, build Villanova, the campus of Villanova. And from there, that was really the foundation of it, because one of their primary purposes was to help Irish immigrants coming over. And so for the longest of times, or since the beginning of times, the Irish have always been coming, non-athletic related, to provide education, and particularly for the Irish that were arrived in Philadelphia and needed an education. And so I think when Jumbo saw it really was a serendipitous meeting. It was George Gaida, who was on the US team in London in 1948. And he, along with Browning Ross, who was running the steeplechase, and Gaida was running the 400, they bump into Jimmy Reardon in the cafeteria, and they're kind of talking the Villanova experience up, and before you know it, Jimmy kind of tells him that he's going to venture to Villanova. Now, meanwhile, what they don't realize is that Jimmy's married and has a child, and he lives in Ireland, and he's young, and just during the war years, he was too young to go to the war, and ended up marrying a Miss Ireland, and so he had to talk her to come in to go on the adventure with him. His father was just very apprehensive. He was a banker, and he came from fairly well-to-do background, and his father wanted to make sure that this Jumbo Elliott person was real. He actually took a leave of absence and kind of went to the US with Jimmy Reardon to make sure everything was on the up and up. And also in that meeting was two other athletes, Cumming Clancy and John Joe Barry. And Cumming was a field events person, and Cumming had come from very farming background in Mayo, and had both his parents pass away when he was 10 years old. So he was the leader of the family, grew up as being the leader of the family, joined the Garda, as we would call it, or the police force, which was just an incredible, like to do something like that at a young age, to be accepted into we take it for granted here, but in Ireland back then, and even into the 80s, just to get a job in the bank, or get a job in the post office, or get a job in in public office of some sort. It was a kind of a job for life, and you were secured for life, and that was what you strived for. And so he had to come to terms with leaving the Guards and coming to Villanova, and he did. And then you had John Joe Barry, who was at the height of his athletic career, and he joined him. So all three of them came over, spent their time here at Villanova, and by the end of graduating in 1953, had really anchored the foothold of Ireland and the beginnings of a pipeline that kind of basically went on then for essentially up until now, which was, for the most part, the next 70, 75 years. So they were the pioneers, and they were they call them the trailblazers that got things started. And from there, not too long after was Ron Delaney, who would have recognized these people as a young boy coming through, albeit maybe 10 years behind. And so you have Ronnie in Ireland. Again, he was sought after by Fred Dwyer, who was a US athlete who was over in Trinity College racing for the United States. He sees Ronnie, he knows he's good. And it's not jumbo going over the way we see modern day recruiting. It's really all hearsay. Fred comes back and says, this guy's really good. He just beat this guy, Lang Stanley, who had already been an NCAA champion in the US. He's going to make a big input for us. And Jumbo was an opportunist. He always knew where to find those pockets. And he started to just, all right, let's bring another one over. And so Ronnie comes over. And so Ronnie was probably one of these incredibly important person for Irish economic and public life, because we were coming off literally probably 2 decades of economic turmoil. And Ireland it was after the Second World War. You're 20 years on. Ireland is still not coming out of the doldrums. They're still stuck. And Ronnie goes off to the US. He serves his time in the US. And while he's here in the US, he goes off to the 1956 Olympics and wins a gold medal. And not only does he win the gold medal for Villanova, because he returns to Villanova on campus to go to class, but he wins a gold medal for Ireland. And Ireland were trying to launch themselves into this international platform. And when he arrives on the scene, he's winning in Melbourne. TV is now starting to come alive and it's getting worldwide publicity. It was this kind of moral boost that they needed as a country. And all of a sudden, there was this huge uplifting feeling, all centered around Ronnie's gold medal. And so there was a lot more to just the Irish pipeline in terms of Ireland helping Villanova, but Villanova helping Ireland. Because what Ronnie brought back to Ireland was a mindset. And what you'll find with a lot of these Irish athletes, particularly the really good ones, is that the facets that they talk about are not athletics. The facets that they're talking about is opportunity. The facets that they talk about are mindset. The facets that they talk about is, as Ronnie would put it, Jumbo thought him win or bust. You gotta, you keep in mind that Ronnie's on the cover of Sports Illustrated, the Jumbo's on the cover of Sports Illustrated, that the height of the sport at that time. And so what he was doing was he was conveying back to Ireland this modern ideology that he got from the United States from being in college. So there was this interconnectedness between Villanova and Ireland Villanova. It wasn't a one-way street like Ireland is sending athletes over. It really was Villanova sending athletes back. And when you think of it, of all the Irish athletes, there's been 30 in total. If all the Irish athletes that came over, about 70% of them went back home. Right. And of all the Irish athletes that came over, 70%, again, the same percentage, were all from around Cork and Dublin. So they really primarily came from the 2 major populated areas in Ireland. And they arrive on Villanova's campus every 5 or 6 years. You've got this kind of conveyor belt that starts to begin. And so as a kid growing up, for me even, to watch the Ron Delaney commercials, all the kids are gathered around him and they're, hey, Ronnie, did you bring it? Did you bring it, Ronnie? And Ronnie pulls out his gold medal. And this went on for years. And Ronnie still gives national, he's on national programs. He's still on national radio. He is just he was just such an iconic figure, but it was something that the country needed. And for that reason, he's just been kind of short of sainthood, he's one of these people that has just been such an important facet for Ireland economically, socioeconomically, psychologically, in building some of the foundations that really provided for modern day Ireland as we know it today. And so from Ronnie, Eamon sees Ronnie, Eamon comes over and kind of catapults himself into being a professional career for 19 years, multiple world records. He lives in New York. The Irish take him under his wing. They literally fall in love with him. And so you go to the Garden, and I know because I've competed against him in the Garden. And when he would come out onto the track, back then in the 80s, there was full crowds, 20,000 people, and they would the place would just lift the roof off Madison Square Garden simply because it was Eamon and he was Irish and there was a connection. And he lived in Rye, New York, and he was working in New York, and he was Villanova, right? And so this kind of history just kept perpetuating itself. And so now I'm a young boy in Ireland, and I'm growing up, and I asked my dad, can I stay up late on Sunday night? Because right at the end of sports on a Sunday night, they'd get the feed from the US, and they'd put maybe 2 or 3 minutes highlights from the indoor races that take place in New York. That's all I wanted to watch as a kid. Just wanted to see Eamon running. Didn't know him, nothing, never met him, nothing like that. Just he was an iconic figure. And again, Eamon would have been 9 or 10 years older than me. So as a kid growing up, you start conjuring these dreams and these ambitions, and they're so outrageous dreams because as a high school kid, we are looking at the field day that you put on there. I never won a field day in high school, ever, in my whole tenure in high school. So I was not bound to go to college. And I took a job right out of high school. And then a year later, I ended up coming to Villanova too. So you have this incredible continuation. And when you talk to Eamon, he's passionate about the team culture. He's passionate about the mindset that Villanova created for him. In interviews, when we sit and we talk about Villanova, as I've done with Ronnie or as I've done with Eamon, and all of them for that matter. And when I talk to then the person that comes after me is Sonia O'Sullivan. Now that was a whole new watershed that was taking place, because back in the 70s was after civil rights, the Title IX started to emerge. And while Title IX was being unfolded in the US, and it took quite a while for it to expand in the 70s, Sonia was growing up in Ireland. And so all of a sudden the opportunity became available in the mid to late 80s by the time it really took its foothold. And in fairness to Villanova back then, there was a lot of schools were dragging because it was costly. It was an expensive endeavor to start matching money for women as for men. Villanova saw it as, hey, we're very good in basketball. We're very good in track. Let's just get ahead. Let's just jump ahead. And so, believe it or not, a lot of we had incredible wins in the mid to late 80s and the early 90s. And it was really before the Power Five as we know it today that everyone talks about in the NCAAs. They had not emerged yet. And so Villanova took advantage of that, and they started to win national championships while everyone else was sitting around figuring out whether they're going to jump in or not and really match the Title IX. And it took a long time. Sonia arrives on the scene. A lot of the good US athletes are already at Villanova, and she starts to grow and develop. And you talk with her, and it's like she wanted to be a pioneer in her own way. She wanted to be a pioneer for women. She wanted to come to the US. She wanted to run with the best athletes in the US. And she would say, I've quoted her saying Villanova was magical to her. It was a can-do environment. If you came here, you had this sense of I could be anything I wanted to be. And of course she did. And I would say, with all due respects to all of us and to Ronnie, Sonia was probably the most decorated of all of us in the Irish pipeline. But interestingly to note is that of all the Irish athletes, there was probably about 30 of them in total. And some of the stats I just came across recently, and I just felt for this I'd like to share with you. But of the 30 Irish Villanovans, and keep in mind 70% of them came from Dublin and Cork, as I said, 12 of them, so almost half, but 12 of them went on to make a collection of 22 Olympic appearances. And they ended up winning 29 major medals. And when I say major medal, it's at a world championship, a European championship, an Olympic Games of that sort. There was 31 world records between them. There was 198 sub 4-minute miles between the men's side. And when you look at 130 sub 1500 meters, there's a collection of well over 300 sub 4-minute mile equivalents. And this is just from one group of people that took 70 years to migrate or make their way to Villanova and back. So it's very impressive when you think about it. But I think the thing that really resonates with me a lot is the fact that this was an opportunity for young people to experience the US in a big way. And I think there was an insatiable appetite to grow and develop and use the psychological aspects that were provided in America, but primarily at Villanova, and for those athletes in track and field to really be able to develop. And when we still talk, we all get together, we still talk, we're very close. And I recruited Sonia. Sonia would have come to the US. Sonia was my babysitter when my kids were growing up. Then my manager lived in London. Sonia joined our group. So we all lived in London every summer for, 10 or 15 years. So you have this kind of real Eamon. We're on a Zoom call last week doing something with Eamon. Ronnie calls periodically. They all want to know what's going on. There's this incredible family around it. And it's an amazing, I think it's an amazing historical piece of Villanova that I'm glad, with the help of Beaudry and myself over the last number of years, we're just trying to archive as much as possible so that it's there for the future and preserved for the future. I think I've said enough at that point.
That's fantastic, Marcus. Thank you. So interesting. So I'm just going to give people a few minutes if they want to add any of their questions to the chat box, and we might do a little Q&A if you and Beaudry are okay with that. Beaudry, there's one in already for you. Somebody is wondering if you're still looking for the names of the 1965 2-mile world record team members. I think Tom might know them if you're stuck.
Yes, email me.
Email me. Okay, Tom, I'm going to put Beaudry's email in the chat for you. Great, thank you. So Joseph is just wondering, can you talk about Schiefer Clarig Butner, is that meant to be Butler, and her recent success?
Yes, I will. And you know what, I should have, I felt like I was going on too long.
No, keep going.
Modern day Ireland with Schiefer Butner Clary. She's done incredibly well. She broke the Irish record last week. She ran 2 minutes, first time ever. And she's professionally running. She's one of our latest. And we've had of the most recent graduates, Harry Purcell, who just returned to Ireland. We have on the team right now Charlie O'Donovan, who broke 4 minutes last year and will go into the archives as being the youngest Irish Villanova athlete ever to break 4 minutes of the 30 athletes that have come over. But I think what's been very poignant to me is I have a very, very good friend, very close friend, and he went to Arkansas around the same time that I went to Villanova, and we still stay very, very close, and we're in touch a lot. And he is just blown away by the academic aspects of the combination of athletics and academics. And I was just going through, just wandering through some friends of mine today. Jerry O'Reilly, who's Irish guy from County Meath, at Villanova. He runs, if anybody's into Vanguard today, Vanguard Investments, by the way, most of Villanovans, all your retirement is in TIAA, which is probably tied to Vanguard. So you probably should know you're in Vanguard if you don't. But Jerry runs the largest mutual fund in the world. He was on our teams. Sean O'Neill is a senior partner at Bain Capital. Amy went on to be a senator. You know, just when you start talking about what they did after running, it's as impressive as what they were doing as athletes. And my friend, who was also world champion, went to Irish, went to Arkansas, just took a different path. But he's never ceased at the combination that has emerged out of Villanova, both athletically and academically. And point in case with Schieffer was in the Irish studies. Now, albeit she could speak Gaelic, and she went to the Gaelic school in Ireland, but very bright people, all doing really well. Just great to be able to give you that information. But she had a great weekend last weekend, and she's doing exceptionally well.
Great, thanks, Marcus. I put Beaudry's email in the chat, so Tom, if you just give a thumbs up if you got that. I think he did. Yeah, great. So Marcus, somebody here is wondering, could you just speak a little bit about how much recruiting you do currently in Ireland?
How much recruiting I do in Ireland? You know what, I do a bit every year. But we haven't done anything in the last, obviously, 12 months. I have, it's an interesting question, because Ireland's facilities, Ireland's had a blow away weekend last weekend. There's so many young kids coming through, so many kids emerging in between the ages of 18 and 22. And whilst I recruit there, I'm very respectful of how Ireland has grown in an environment that they've tried to provide for their young athletes. That was not there when I was there. In the 80s, we were struggling both economically, and we were struggling in facilities. We were struggling in a lot of things that the US became probably one of the only avenues for you to grow and develop. And the likes of Eamon, Ronnie, and more than just that group that went to other colleges. They all emigrated to the United States, or at least went there for the period of time that they were in college. But my recruiting is very more specific now, and it's for a number of reasons. I'm very big into the fit. It's very important for me that when Irish athletes come over, rather than be a part of a failed experience. So in other words, just going to recruit an Irish athlete, bringing them over and hoping that it's all going to work. Those days are gone for me, where it leads to, I think it leads to poor relationships with the running community. So you want to make sure I do a lot of vetting before they come over. Like for example, Schieffer was 2 years in the making. A lot of conversations, a lot of work to make sure that it was the right fit for her and it was a great experience for her. Charlie O'Donovan was 2 years in the making. And so I find that with the Irish, I take a lot more time to make sure it's the proper place for them. Whilst I think Villanova was a great place, academically, it has changed massively. The academic levels and requirements are demanding so much more so before that you have to make sure that they're going to be comfortable academically. And also, are they going to be comfortable being away from home? And so you try to build the recruiting experience, which I do in Ireland, into a positive experience. So the last three have been positive. Harry Purcell in the 400, 800. Charlie Donovan having a great time here right now. He's with me this weekend down in North Carolina for Big East Championships tomorrow. And then Schieffer, who just graduated, had a wonderful experience. So I think that's more important to me now than ever before, if that helps and explains.
Great, thank you, Marcus. I do have another question for you here, but we're just going to go to Tom for 1 second, because he has a Villanova singlet autographed by Ronnie Delaney. So he's going to hold it up. So if we can spotlight Tom, maybe I can do it. Hang on. Yeah, there he is. So signed by Ronnie Delaney, a Villanova singlet. You better be careful of that, Tom. Beaudry will be after it. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Just another question for you here, Marcus. And you were mentioning about the fit. So just with regard to your own impressions of Villanova as a young athlete in Ireland before coming to campus, Luke is asking this question. And he says, could you share your story of coming to Villanova? He says he recalls it happening on somewhat unusual terms. So I feel there's a story here that we need to get to the bottom of.
Well, maybe Luke should expand on this. I'm not sure, but I wasn't heavily recruited I don't know if Luke's referring to this or not, but I wasn't heavily recruited to Villanova. I literally was very average coming out of high school. I was very fortunate that the man who took me under his wing for the year after I graduated high school, I kind of had an agreement with my mother. I would give it one more year and I would try for these scholarships in the United States. I was never going to go to college in Ireland. And it wasn't that I wasn't capable of going. I think in retrospect, looking back, it was just that the amount of people that only went to college back then was so small compared to the number that go in Ireland now. So there was that in place, and it was very, very the elite of the elite academically just went. And I was a slow developer. I certainly know I was a slow developer athletically, and I was a slow developer, I think, intellectually looking back on it. And I would have no qualms of saying that I struggled in secondary school. And so in that year, a man by the name of Donald Walsh took me under his wing. Donald happened to be part of the Irish pipeline. He was a graduate in 1972. He was second at the NCAA's behind the famous Steve Prefontaine, if people understand running and they know who he is. And so he takes me under his wing for a year, and he is training me for the whole year. And he literally transforms me athletically. And after that year, I come to Villanova, but I didn't get the scholarship probably until the middle of August. I mean, and you have to understand, Villanova would have been my dream school. I would have known Villanova since I was as young as I could remember. I always say the only schools I've heard of back then were Harvard, because you see it in the movies, maybe Princeton, and Villanova, right? And so to be called by Villanova, as it turns out, there was a guy by the name of Ray Brown who decided that at the very last minute he wasn't going to Villanova. He's going to go to UVA instead. It's the first time anybody ever walked away from a Villanova scholarship. So they called me in the middle of August and they said, "Hey, we have a scholarship. Do you want to come?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." I always thank Ray Brown to this day. Ray went to UVA and I came and took his spot at Villanova. So if that's the situation, if that's the circumstances, the unusual circumstances, and I came in as a cross country runner, and Jumbo changed me into a half miler by the end of that year. So everything just changed. I was so desperate to survive academically. I would stay in the library all day long. Beaudry, I've probably been in that library longer than you've ever worked in there. But I would come in on a Saturday. I would stay all day long because I was so afraid I was going to fail out. And as I discovered, it wasn't as difficult as I thought. And I managed myself pretty well in an accounting degree by the time I got finished. And as it turned out, I came back to Villanova for my MBA and ended up doing a CPA. So for a person that was never going to go to college, I gained momentum, but I also gained momentum athletically at the same time. So the scholarship was never on the table from the beginning. It didn't come until right at the last minute to Villanova. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, fantastic. I think Villanova are thankful to have you too. One more question here. And if there's anything else, please do add it, because we're about to finish up in the next few minutes. Marcus, how would you describe the pen relays to your Irish recruits?
It's hard to describe it. And you know, back in the old days, people never came on visits. Like, it's amazing how recruiting has changed now. We have to go there. They have to come here. So we'll fly every Irish athlete in for a weekend. You've got to fly them in. It's like the arms race of recruiting. And everyone does it. And we have kids coming in from Australia for visits. And so there's all these mandates where you can only stay 48 hours. And so they come for 2 days, and then they bunny hop to another school. So they'll come and they do 4 or 5 schools at the same time on the same trip, and they'll go back home and they'll make their choice after they see the schools. I came to Villanova with a bag full of clothes and $20 in my pocket. And that was it, sight unseen, just come and arrive. And I found I've had athletes that have come in that fashion, and it's amazing that they've flourished the most. There was no real choices involved. They had made a decision, they were coming, and that was it. And I'm thinking of a couple right now, and they got off the plane. They'd never come to visit. I'd never went to visit them. and it was done on references. And when they arrived, they seemed to have been just so appreciative of the fact that they were here. But in terms of, I forget the question, where I got distracted.
The pen relays.
Oh, the pen relays. Oh my God. Yeah. So they come and they watch it now, and they're in awe when they see the pen relays. And, it's just an amazing experience. And for me, the pen relays means so much, even though I have a love-hate relationship with it. It wrecks the spring build-up. It's just too big of an event that commands so much of Villanova's attention. And we're tied to it. Every other school can come and go when they have their great teams. We can't. We have to suck it up every year and go to pen relays because it's our local event. So you have all that combination going on there. And for me, it was a defining moment in my career as an athlete, because we had failed at the pen relays in 1982, 83. We'd lost everything, first time in 20 years, and I'm anchoring. And I'll be the first to say I wasn't committed. I wasn't where I needed to be. And I went home to Villanova, and I sat with Donny and Donny Walsh. You have to find him in a pub. So you'd go to the local pub, and he'd be sitting there. And of course he had his NCAA ring, and he's hitting it off the glass, and he's listening to my conversation. And finally he turned to me, and I've said this story often, where he turned to me and he said, "You're an absolute disgrace." And he said, there's nothing, and I think it's the thing that resonates the most for me in that conversation that night. Failing isn't the worst thing you could do in life. Not trying is the worst thing you could do. And I walked out of the bar that night. And of course, my roommate from Glenside, PA, was a regular student, wanted to go camping in Ireland. He was arriving the next day. And so I was trying to make an excuse that I'll start next week. And he said, "Why don't you start tomorrow? You've wasted enough time already." And I did. And that a year later, I came back to Penn, and we won at Penn. And it was probably the most exhilarating, the most career turning moment for me, because it defined me as a person. And I decided that working hard for something and the journey for something was going to be way more important than the actual win or the loss itself. And for me, Penn is very dear to me, but at the same time, it's kind of a love-hate relationship. But with 40,000 people in the stadium on a Saturday afternoon, and you get this opportunity to race as a college kid, it's probably, to me, there was more stress in that arena than there was in Olympic Games, World Championships, anything. So I feel like it's an incredibly important part of who we are as Villanovans, because it helps people to really take responsibility and accountability for what their training is the prior year. So I always say it's like getting your grades. A lot of professors in here, students, it's like getting your grade at the end of the year, whether you put the time and the work into it or not.
Brilliant, thank you. So Joseph is our director for the Centre for Irish Studies. He's just going to hop on and say a couple of words.
I just wanted to say thank you, Marcus. You're an inspiration to all of us. I remember when you were over in my office giving me some running tips. I just wanted to show my own fan from 1970.
Bagora. That's what it says, Bagora.
But as a young man growing up in the middle of the United States, I knew Eamon Coughlin from Sports Illustrated, right?
Yeah.
So just to see an Irish runner blazoned across the front page of the cover of two Sports Illustrated was incredibly inspirational to people all over the country. So I just wanted to say thank you. Thanks for what you do. And thanks everybody. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you, Joe. Great to be here.
Thanks, Joseph. That's fantastic. Thank you so much to Beaudry and Marcus for being here today and telling us all a bit more about the Irish pipeline. And definitely do check out some of the stuff that's over in Falvey Library. It's really very impressive. So best of luck with the rest of the season, Marcus, to you and all your team. And hope everybody has a lovely evening. Míle maith, Slán.